Let's start with the second conference. Okay, people arriving. Perfect. So, let me introduce Cristina Martinez, who will be moderating and introducing herself. Our next speaker, Constantine Vardavas. Cristina Martinez works here at the Tobacco Control Unit in the Catalan Institute of Oncology, and she's mainly in charge of research projects on training for tobacco cessation and also in evaluating some practices in the hospitals, practices in tobacco control, of course. So thank you very much to both of you, to Constantine, to coming from Athens. And please, Cristina, you will moderate and so on. Let's try to accommodate to the time. So, thank you very much.
So, good morning, everyone. As it has been said, tobacco consumption is the single. Okay, it's not on. So let's start again. Good morning, everyone. Tobacco consumption is the single largest avoidable health risk in the European Union. It is responsible for 700 deaths every year, and around 50% of smokers are prematurely die because of tobacco-related diseases. Despite the considerable progress made in the recent years, the number of smokers in the EU is still high. As it has been said, 28% of overall population still smoke. To address this situation, the European Union and the member states have taken various tobacco control measures in form of legislation, recommendations, and information campaigns. Recently, the European Commission has approved a common framework, the Tobacco Products Directive, which aims to improve the functioning of the internal market for tobacco and related products. We have today our speaker, an expert on the field and distinguished researcher, Dr. Vardavas, who will explain some of the measures approved by the EU of ensuring a high level of health protection for European citizens. Dr. Vardavas is a medical epidemiologist by training. He's very active, and when I say very, it's very in capitals. And he's very active in European regulatory science and public policy, including the scientific basis for the European Tobacco Products Directive. He is the coordinator of numerous projects, including Horizons 2020, Europlus, that evaluates the population impact of the Tobacco Products Directive, and was the scientific team leader of 3 studies from the European Commission with regards product reporting, e-cigarettes, and priority additive. Within this presentation, Dr. Vardavas will provide an overview of the main points of the European Products Directive and the outcomes of the studies performed to support the regulatory activities across the European population. This presentation also covered the development of a common reporting format for submission of data of ingredients contained in tobacco and related products, the role of packaging, the regulation of electronic cigarettes, and also the impact of Tobacco Product Directive on the European public health. Finally, to this presentation, he will conclude of how regulatory actions impact population taxes and upcoming exciting actions and challenges that will be faced. So, Constantine, the floor is yours.
Good morning. Still good morning. So good morning to me. Good morning. Thank you for a very lovely and long introduction.
Okay.
If I can do 1/3 of what you just said, I'll be very, very happy myself. So, the European Tobacco Products Directive. A big chapter, a very big chapter in at least European tobacco control. First of all, just as it has to be done, of course, the declaration, I have no conflicts of interest to declare. While I was the scientific team leader for a number of activities for the European Commission for the Tobacco Products Directive implementing acts, I would not per se report on these activities, but more on the general picture of the Tobacco Products Directive. And I will be discussing and presenting aspects that are publicly available One would have to search to find them, but they are publicly available, so there's nothing confidential that I'll be presenting today in my presentation. So, as mentioned before, the European Union, which I so much love, and the tobacco epidemic. So there are 28, or 27 plus 1, 28 plus something, or minus something, we'll see, European member states. But if we look at that, we have 508 million people. 580 million people, different languages, different cultures, different backgrounds, but under this one unity called the European Union. So whatever legislation one implements, you are affecting 500 million people. We've got to keep the numbers, 500 million people. As mentioned by Christina, the premature deaths in the EU per year attributable to tobacco accounts to approximately over 700,000 people. But if we look at something even more relevant, at least to the ears of many policymakers, or at least in member states, tobacco use in the European Union does cost about 25 billion per year to public health care. Even in Greece, which is, of course, we all know very well aware of the Greek financial crisis. I'm Greek. I'm very aware of the Greek financial crisis we have. Tobacco costs 500 million per year. So when we cut paychecks, cut salaries, cut pensions, we should also think of first cutting back on tobacco use. That would be very beneficial. Now, the productivity losses account to about 8 billion per year. So we have a big population, a significant percentage of smokers, and a big cost to society. So what do we have to do? First of all, we have to think of the product. And when you regulate a product, it's good to know the product. And it's good to know how you can have the actual evolution of the product from design, as I say, to disease. There are many aspects that are covered under specific regulations. They all come under these 4 different columns. One is the actual tobacco product itself, with regards to the characteristics of the product that one has to keep into account before you start having a regulation, with regards to the type of tobacco, the blends, the physical aspects of a tobacco product, additives, emissions, all these take into account what is a product. And of course, the human perspective, the perception of use, the perception of risk, the topography and the exposure, these are all things when you think from an epidemiological point of view, or even from a clinical point of view, that you have to take into account. Of course, the next step after the actual product itself is how the product is promoted. And as very well mentioned before by 2 excellent speakers, it's very difficult to follow a floor after Christina and Tibor, but I'll try my best to make up to the high standard here. Price, sales, marketing, and advertising are very important parts of the next step of how you go from a tobacco product to a tobacco disease. One must take into account also the population use, the factors that are related to population use. There's the age, the gender, the race, the attitudes, the beliefs, the things that actually modify how you would see the market brands, the market brand promotion, or the actual tobacco brand itself. Now, all of this, if you look at it from a clinical perspective, leads to what you'd see addiction, disease, death and disability, but this all is based on the severity of addiction and the phenotype. So think of it from a clinical perspective. You have the product, and it leads to disease. So the policy priorities. Now, the European Union and its 28 member states, they must implement tobacco control measures for the protection of public health. And as it's mentioned on the very nice European Commission website, the policy measures include the regulation of tobacco products on the EU market, which may cover packaging, labeling, ingredients, and many, many other aspects, some of which I'll go into today. The advertising restrictions for tobacco products, the creation of smoke-free environments, tax measures and activities against illicit trade, and tobacco control, as that's mentioned, the words anti-smoking campaigns. But today I'm going to focus mainly on the first aspect, which is the regulation of tobacco products on the EU market. Now, the regulation of tobacco products on the EU market is through, as we know, the European Tobacco Products Directive. Now, we may have heard a lot about the directive. We may know a lot about the directive, but it's sometimes always good to get a refresh of really what is the context of the Tobacco Products Directive, and as a researcher, how one can see how the Tobacco Products Directive can be used to protect public health. So the Tobacco Products Directive provides a mandate for stronger regulation of the manufacture, the marketing and sales of tobacco products, ingredients, additives, a disclosure to the public, oral tobacco and e-cigarettes. These are some of the aspects covered by the Tobacco Products Directive for the overall aim of improving a European market. As I said, we're 28 different member states, but we must think in one common way. A common currency is one way. A common Tobacco Products Directive is another. This is a common approach to a specific aspect. Of course, this is all within the context of FCTC ratification and implementation. So if we look at these activities, why the need for a Tobacco Products Directive? While we are 28 member states, we're very close to each other. You can easily just don't even need a passport anymore. You just cross the border with a simple document, or even not without a simple document, and just move freely. But when you have a free move of people, you also have a free movement of products, and it's important that consumers, whether they're in Greece, in Spain, or in Ireland, have the same level of protection. So the new Tobacco Products Directive governs the manufacture, presentation of sale. It was signed in April 2014. In May 2016, as we'll see, there's a timeline on the next slide. And now's the time where we have a transposition into the national legislations and the designing and support of implementing acts that would aid the actual developments and hands-on things that have to be done to have a Tobacco Products Directive. So it was the initiation for the transposition into the national legislation took place in May, and they have specific time points, some of which are on this slide here. The products that are regulated under the Tobacco Products Directive, there's an exhaustion of stock deadline, which is the 20th of May 2017. So a lot of these aspects that we see, that we'll talk about, packaging, labeling, a lot of information, a lot of other activities, there's a deadline that's fast approaching. In less than 6 months, this deadline will have expired, and now is the time really to start evaluating how the TPD is transposed and how it actually impacts public health. Now, of course, further down the line, there are many other time points that we must take into account, including the tracking and tracing for cigarettes and roll your own, which is another big hot topic. We don't always speak only about e-cigarettes. Let's focus on the bigger tobacco control issue. And also the ban on menthol cigarettes from May 2020, which is an important part. So the products under the Tobacco Products Directive are, just for a baseline to get up to scratch, cigarettes, roll your own, pipe tobacco, smokeless tobacco, water pipe tobacco. I really enjoyed your photo of really water pipe. E-cigarettes, novel tobacco products. I said this a few years ago at a large conference in the room. I said that it was on e-cigarettes. And everyone was, oh, hot about e-cigarettes. I said, e-cigarettes is going to be the top of an iceberg. Wait and see what happens next. I said, 3 years ago, let's wait for the novel tobacco products to appear on the market. And 3 years later, here now presenting and saying, we should be really careful about the novel tobacco products. And also herbal tobacco products. But when we look at the product and how the TPD is regulating it, we should remember that a tobacco product is not a plant that is grown in a farmer's village, that is nicely dried up, hanged up, cut into pieces of paper like a piece of lettuce, rolled up into a paper and given. It is not. It is a meticulously designed nicotine delivery device that kills 50% of its users. So it's not a natural product. When one says that, oh, it's just leaves that are dried up, we must keep in mind very basic things, but we've got to stick sometimes always to the basics. It is not a natural product. For me, it's more like a toothpaste than a natural product. So how does the Tobacco Products Directive cover this aspect? With regards to the regulation of ingredients, while we have the, if you've seen the actual package lately, removal of the tar, nicotine, and CO contents, even though these aspects are reported, the Tobacco Products Directive stipulates that there must be significant reporting of ingredients. What is this chemical concoction which is called a tobacco product? What is the secret ingredient in this product? The reporting on toxicity, even though toxicity is a card that's always played very well by the industry because they play the toxicity or relative toxicity game. The emissions, sales data, and marketing. But the important thing is, and this is one of the aspects that we've worked very strongly over the past few years, is that there must be a structuring of a reporting format as a tool to collect data that can be useful to regulators, to researchers, to public health. So, utility from a public health perspective, well, the main objective of a new reporting format that the Tobacco Product Directive has introduced, that's one of its first things, a new reporting format. People must be, the manufacturers, the tobacco industry, must be able to report what's in the tobacco product and in very, very large detail. So without going into too much information about what is the common reporting format, let's just stress the fact that this is an unprecedented opportunity to increase the information we have. If you're in clinical practice and suddenly you're missing the blood tests, you're missing the blood cultures, and you have a patient with a high fever, and you're wondering, now what do I do? What you need is information. If you have information, you know what to do. Without information, we're just doing a lucky guess. And from clinical practice, I'm aware that I think a lot of you are from clinical practice, it's important to make informed decisions in whatever you do. So this is a new opportunity to increase the valuable information that's available to public health, and this would allow for a better idea of what should we be doing, what are the next steps, how should we be monitoring these products. So that's one of the first aspects of the Tobacco Products Directive. Of course, a big challenge is be careful what you ask for, because when you ask for a lot of information, it means it needs a lot of hands, minds, weekends, nights, holidays spent to be able to analyze all this information. So I do hope we'll be able to have that opportunity and the time to do so. So with regards to ingredient regulation, another aspect that is covered is that it regulates the ingredients that give a characterizing flavor. As I'll show you further down in my presentation, there are some specific aspects that at a European level have been identified to be associated with either reduced perception of harm or with increased initiation. So flavor is one important aspect of this. Another aspect that the Tobacco Products Directive covers, just so as I say, always we have to keep to the basics sometimes. It's always great to know the very details of how an e-cigarette may impact, but we've got to keep also to baseline core tobacco control 101. So it also forbids ingredients such as vitamins or additives that give the impression that tobacco has a health benefit or reduced health risks. So imagine a vitamin tobacco or caffeine tobacco. Don't forget your coffee, just have a cigarette. Additives that have coloring properties for emissions. We also know from industry research that additives are there to reduce the color of the smoke, to change the color of the smoke. For tobacco products for smoking, it regulates ingredients that facilitate inhalation or nicotine uptake, which is a big chapter. It's a few words: facilitate inhalation and nicotine uptake. But I'm sure we could all spend lives on this and still would not cover it substantially. And of course, the regulation of additives that have CMR properties in unburned form. Above all this, there's a specific requirement for 15 priorities, as we call additives, first-line additives that are subject to enhanced reporting obligations and enhanced scrutiny from scientific research. I can't go into more into this, but there's some information on the web about the priority additives. So as just stated beforehand, the misleading cigarette design and packaging characteristics are one of the things that the Tobacco Products Directive is here to try and change. So of course, and I'm sure we're going to hear that from the speaker later on today, that's how the tobacco industry uses specific activities to amplify the perceived sensory reward that one would have, or to indirectly or directly communicate a misleading information of reduced harm. So as we say that cigarette design and marketing features are associated with increased smoking susceptibility and perception of reduced harm among smokers in the EU, and we've published substantially on that. And we've indicated that for those who reported that the main reason, or one of the reasons, the key characteristics that led them to initiate and increase their smoking, menthol was specifically mentioned, flavors such as spicy and fruity. And this is a secondary data set analysis of the Eurobarometer, a data set which I really, really love with a big heart, because it's very valuable information. The shape and size of an e-cigarette is also statistically related to perception of harm among youth. So when you regulate a product, you're not regulating only the industry, you're regulating the future of the youth. And that's why. Organic or natural or additive-free tobacco product, the tobacco product is all additive. So when one calls it an additive-free product, it's like saying there's an oxygen-free air. Well, it's not, there's oxygen in there, whether we like it or not. And without going into further detail, as I'm sure that's going to be covered extensively about packaging, but of course using the striking colors, the distinctive fonts that we're all very familiar of and all very familiar during high school. I remember I was very proud during high school to carry a specific logo of a company because I thought it was making me a big macho teenager. Little did I know that years later I'd be working on the exact reason why teenagers pick up such products and wear them on their back or their hat. So using striking colors and distinctive fonts and carefully crafted materials, cigarette packaging, as mentioned, is the last frontier that the industry has with regards to advertising. And of course, that's what the Tobacco Products Directive has impacted significantly. I'm sure we're all very familiar that quite a while ago we had that 30 to 35% text-only warning messages on tobacco and roll your own. We had slim pack and small sizes. These all impacts both perception and acceptability of a product, and also flavors. This is the pre-TPD, but we're very lucky now to see in the post-TPD, we've made a huge leap at a European level, a huge leap. We've gone from the 30% text, which was really, as we'd say, belonged to the past, to something that was at least a next step, an important next step, which is graphic labeling on cigarette packs. Now we have 65% of picture and text warnings on the fronts with cessation messages, a health warning message, and a picture. Of course, we've got a lot of work to go towards plain packaging, but some member states have already taken activities or implemented plain packaging, and a big congratulations to them. And I do hope to see that 28 member states would move towards plain packaging in the near future. Also, we must take into account that flavors now would be banned, and also slim packs and small sizes also banned based on the Tobacco Products Directive. Now, these are aspects that by research and hard evidence have been shown that lead to youth initiation or perception of harm. So one legislation can impact the population. Again, using the Eurobarometer as a baseline for analysis, this indicates this was the effectiveness of or text that was available beforehand versus pictorial. When you compare countries that have text only and pictorial, this is based before the TPD was implemented. The countries that had pictorial warnings, the participants were 30% more likely to report a behavioral response because they saw that graphic warning label compared to a text warning. So we must keep into account that every step we're making, every single step, is very important in reducing the tobacco epidemic in Europe. Every single step. Then, of course, we come to the question of e-cigarettes and novel tobacco products, and it's great to know that the European Union and its member states have done a very strong and decisive stance on regulating an unregulated product in many parts of the world. Of course, there's a lot of debate. The important part is it is regulation. There is regulation. Now, to be able to understand why we should be covering the e-cigarettes, while we're all very, very familiar with this classical, I think, Esteve, how many citations would this have? 5,000 citations? So very congratulations to Lopez Colosho and the colleagues that would have written that specific paper. They're the 4 classical stages of the tobacco epidemic. But maybe this was great back in the 94. That's what, 22 years later we're now. I'm not either good at maths either, Christina. So 22 years later, well, we should have been speaking about prevalence and death for the past 22 years. I'd like to suggest and bring this forward as a new suggestion. Maybe we should be looking at a different type of the tobacco epidemic. Because just like in classical medicine, you have a different virus that affects different cells of the body, has a different susceptibility, a different medication, a different risk, different subpopulation groups that are at higher risk. With the same way, we should probably be thinking that the evolution of the tobacco epidemic is not the 4 classical stages anymore, but it is based more on the 3 different types of infectivity that we would see for a tobacco product. It's a very provocative thought, but I think that time is right to bring it forward. So, type 1, where we may have the smokeless and cigarettes, and those are the countries that usually have the smokeless and cigarettes, with a still increasing prevalence of tobacco use, a regional production and use of tobacco, where traditional tobacco control initiatives are very much needed, which, for instance, just as examples, non-binding, would be specific areas. Then we have type 2 infectivity, where it is located in countries with developing tobacco control initiatives, and it's an environment potentially interested or experimenting with other products, but still at the apex of the classical tobacco epidemic. But in these countries, while there's a steady cigarette sales consumption or a slight decrease because they've just passed the apex, there's a growing awareness of the harm of tobacco products. And this is a very susceptible environment for the expansion of specific novel products that we should be very careful of. And of course, type 3, as we see in specific countries where they advance tobacco control, and these are the countries that we'd expect them to be at the forefront of leading tobacco control, we see them being split into half or split into different subgroups due to their role and perception on the types of modified risk tobacco products. So this takes us into the point of e-cigarettes. Now, e-cigarettes are based in the Tobacco Products Directive to have warning labels. The product contains nicotine, which is a highly addictive substance. It's 30% of the pack, but still is 30%. There's special and safety mandates from e-cigarettes within the Tobacco Products Directive with regards to the toxicological and addiction data on product ingredients and emissions, including when heated. Information on nicotine and doses and uptake. There's the regulation that should include only ingredients of high purity and that they should be delivered at specific production requirements. While it probably is not Santa's wish list, it at least is a specific hard step. Let's make some evidence. We need evidence. Other aspects of the e-cigarette regulation and Tobacco Products Directive include the regulation of advertising. It's very unfortunate sometimes to see revisiting 50 years later tobacco product advertising. Whether we call it tobacco product or nicotine tobacco product or whatever you want to call it, we're still looking at a specific type, family of products. So additional reporting requirements, no. I will. Mode of sales, ad, etc. So the e-cigarettes are covered. One important aspect, and I must make reference to Tax from Esther Fernandez, who's the PI, and we're lucky to be partners in this project. One of the aspects that we cover, that are covered by the Tobacco Products Directive, is research on emissions. Now, this is what Tax is going to bring forward to the table. So we're very lucky to have Esteban. Esteban, thank you for leading this initiative. It's a pleasure to be part of it. Of really what is the impact of the emissions of e-cigarettes. And towards the, we must take into account novel tobacco products which include information on ingredients and emissions, the risk-benefit analysis of the products, expected effects on cessation, initiation, consumer perception. All these have to be taken into account. One cannot make a leap. One must make evidence-based decisions. Of course, tracking and tracing is another aspect, which I don't have to go into too much details. So, my last 5 or 6 slides. How one monitors the Tobacco Products Directive? Well, it started. The game has begun. The clock is ticking. We can't pause the clock. We've got to be there and monitor the clock as it's moving ahead. So at the moment, what we should be doing is data collection. We should be using the same methods we'd have in epidemiology and in clinical practice for tobacco product regulation. One of the aspects, which I must also bring forward, of course, is another project that we're glad to have again in collaboration, myself now as the coordinator and Esteve as a core team partner in this project, is EURES Plus, which is another Horizon 2020, which has its aim to monitor and evaluate the population impact of the Tobacco Products Directive. Not the regulation, but the population impact of the directive. And also collecting information actively from 9 European member states, but also through the Eurobarometer from 28 European member states. One of these main aspects in which we have a number of partners is the creation of a cohort of smokers using the ITC methodology, but the cohort of smokers in 6 European member states and follow them up as the TPD is going ahead. So it's a classical cohort study. Does the TPD impact smokers? Does it lead to cessation? Does it change perceptions of risk? These are questions that would be answered in EURES Plus. And the other last part of EURES Plus is using the wealth of data that's collected through the Eurobarometer. So one can see information on graphic warning labels, on perceptions of harm, on design, on e-cigarettes, on the impact of e-cigarettes on perceived risk or perceived cessation or perceived experimentation with cessation, or as however one wants to see it. And all this is going to be done throughout EURES Plus. And of course, the last part, which comes to the e-cigarette question, will be monitoring, does the TPD impact the e-cigarette product as an evolution of a product? And if it impacts the evolution of the product, does that impact the consumer? So we're doing a very intense data collection process. So, to summarize my 25-minute and 58-second presentation, evidence-based decisions are needed, whether it's in clinical practice or in public health. And that's tobacco control regulatory science, whether it's through TACSH, is it through EUROS Plus, is it the Eurobarometer, is it Tobacco Products Directive, needs to provide information. And when you have information, you can make an evidence-based decision. And with an evidence-based decision, you can lead to the implementation of even stronger and newer tobacco control legislations. So, thank you very much for listening to me. It's a pleasure.
So thank you very much, Constantine, to give us more details about the Tobacco Products Directive. And we have now like 5-7 minutes to have some discussion. And if you have any question to Dr. Vardavas, please raise your hand and say your name, please, and where you're working and position. No? Okay, to start with, then I'm going to warm up this discussion and start with a question to him. You have mentioned that we have a lot of challenges to face. We have now a nice framework on Tobacco Products Directive, but we have challenges, and one of the big challenges that I see is that in terms of implementation. Tibor has mentioned that FCTC, countries and parties that are members of the FCTC reported like 70% of what they have done. In terms of accountability, what is going to happen with the directive?
It's a very important and timely question. What is the main challenge of the Tobacco Products Directive from a personal view, speaking as Constantine at the moment? With regards to the Tobacco Products Directive, implementation is probably going to be one of the challenging issues. Maybe the most challenging, depending on how the product evolution unfolds over the next few years. But implementation is very important because while the legislation is centrally and designed centrally, and agreed on, of course, because it's all based on agreement between the 28 member states, it belongs to the member state to be able to either specifically adopt the TPD or even go beyond TPD stipulations and go for plain packaging, for instance. And we must take into account that with regards, say, to FCTC ratification, FCTC is a bigger picture. It covers everything from smoke-free environments to industry interference to tobacco product itself to a lot of different aspects. And this is a very specific product regulation. So it's a more technical aspect, and because the end user of this and the person that we must impact through the Tobacco Products Directive is usually the industry, it's in the member states' best position to move ahead and implement the Tobacco Products Directive at a national level. I am aware that a number of member states are a bit slow at the moment in transposing the directive. I do looking forward to seeing that everyone would implement the directive so we can create the data that's needed to move the next TPD 3 ahead. Ooh.
Okay,
well,
Christina.
if I've stimulated questions
First
from
Christina,
Tibor and
later
Christina, that means that I've made an interesting point.
No. We're coordinating very well, Tibor and me. Thank you. I think specifically I would like to come back at one point to your new sort of suggestion, the type 1, type 2, and type 3. And I think this could be a seminar wherever Esteve is in itself. Yes, you're there, part of a publicum. So I don't have a question. I have a comment, and this is about your last point in terms of the successful start of the actual implementation of a directive, because I think we have been all wondering how quickly the 28 countries are actually taking the TPD as part of a national law, but they are legally bound to be doing. And actually, I think the start has been more positive than we had thought, because most of the countries, I know some of the countries are still working on the transposal, but most of the countries have already done that.
Yes. Yes.
And I also think that what is very encouraging is that, for example, a relatively small country, I'm coming from Estonia myself, so I can call, which is a very small country, so I can call another country a small one, which is Slovenia, which is a relatively new European Union country, and where they are using the opportunity, momentum of being obliged to transpose a directive, to go beyond, and also include, for example, plain packaging into their national law, what they are hardly negotiating in the first months of 2017 in the parliament after governmental decision. So I think in some ways it has been a very strong kickoff, which gives me some hope and positive feeling that it could make really a difference, and then you will be monitoring it, what actually it makes in terms of a difference and what are results, right? So it was more a comment, but very nice talk, thanks.
Thank you very much.
Okay, you almost took it, but I would like to be more direct. How many European Union member states have not transposed the directive by the deadline? The number.
I'm speaking as Constantine.
Yes, sure.
So speaking as Constantine, from my knowledge, I think there are 3 to 4 that are still on the way. I think we're on. I would want to echo what Christina said. We're on a very good track, and sometimes it's good to pat the good students on the back and say, "Well done," and then the others usually follow suit, either because they have to follow suit or because they feel everyone's moving ahead, it's time to move ahead. And echoing what Christina said, it was very positive to see that, for instance, for graphic warning labels, that we're expecting that for the industry to move into in 2017. And then suddenly I remember I was installing an air conditioning in my flat, and then suddenly the electrician shows me a tobacco pack, and it had graphic warning labels, and I was like, I've been waiting 12 years to see that. History is made sometimes quicker than we expect.
Okay, point taken. The other question is, I would like to challenge you, and my question would be, would you consider electronic cigarettes tobacco products? Why I'm asking Constantine Vardavas, because I'm not receiving an answer from our governing body. I mean, the COP has not responded to the question if electronic cigarettes should be considered within the scope of the convention or not. Are they tobacco products or not? What is your opinion?
My personal opinion is that there's an underlining aspect here, and the underlining aspect is nicotine addiction. And it's not treating the product as a product, you're treating nicotine addiction and the mechanisms, the mosquitoes that would carry the virus of nicotine addiction, if you want to say it in that simple term. So I would say that we should be treating anything that has nicotine with a very precautionary aspects and be very evidence-based on how we move ahead. So I would personally put them under the same box. We're looking at nicotine-containing products, whether you want to call them A, B, or C, we must be monitoring them very carefully because at the end of the day, it's nicotine addiction we must be very careful about, and population addiction.
Okay, along the same lines, there is Article 5.2b of the Convention, which requires all parties to implement legislation, regulation, and whatever measures to control nicotine addiction. So it's there, nicotine addiction, but still the question remains, should parties consider this as a tobacco product? Because they are asking us. And we are not able to give them an answer because we don't have the mandate. But we can point to Article 5.2b that they need to do something about nicotine addiction.
Yes.
So any other questions? Someone that wants to continue or open a new topic?
Hello, good afternoon. As you said, well, you didn't really answer if e-cigarettes are considered to be tobacco, but actually, then should nicotine gums and nicotine patches be also considered tobacco?
We must take into account, good point, we must take into account the game that we're playing with. And the game that we've been put into, and it's a specific game that we've been put into, is that how does one look at the tobacco product? Does one look at it from the nicotine perspective or not from the nicotine perspective? Now, sometimes we must be very careful we're not playing the game that they want us to play, or playing the musical instrument the way they want us to play the musical instrument. As I say, we're always focusing maybe on a very, very interesting and exotic tree, but we must keep into account there's a whole forest we should be looking at. Now, with regards to e-cigarettes, they are under the Tobacco Products Directive. So the regulation in the European Union member state is as a product that is under the Tobacco Products Directive. And look at the term, Tobacco Products Directive. I think it's very, very clear.
Okay, thank you. I understand they should be regulated, but I don't really agree that they're in the same bag as tobacco products. But I'm absolutely, I agree that all e-cigarettes should be absolutely regulated.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
We have more questions there. I think that we have a couple of minutes more.
Thank you. It's more like a comment than a question also.
Okay.
I'm from Poland. My name is Jakub Baszewski. I'm from the Cancer Center Institute of Oncology in Warsaw, Poland. And from my point of view, the TPD was much needed kick in behind for the Polish government, because I think we would wait another 10 years for the pictorial health warnings and other important regulations that now since July are being implemented in Poland. And I would like to also say that we went a little bit ahead in terms of electronic cigarettes, because in many aspects they are regulated just as the tobacco products, and mainly in terms of possibility to use them in public places, which is now forbidden. And personally think it's a very good option, because for most of Polish users of electronic cigarettes, the main reason to try them was to use them in the places where smoking is not allowed. And also the new thing, we implemented the health warnings on electronic cigarettes, and I saw them for the first time right now when I was traveling to Barcelona on the airport in Warsaw, and I think it also is a very important step. It was a good thing to see the health warning on the package of electronic cigarettes, because it raises the awareness, and it's a warning sign for the users that actually this product brings harm. So that's all I wanted to say for now.
Thank you for your comment.
Close
Do you want to say something?
Just want to close the aspect that
We have only 1 minute.
I have 10 seconds. That's all I
okay,
need. 10
okay.
seconds. We've got an excellent legislation, the Tobacco Products Directive. We've got the guidelines to play the game for the next few years. It's a matter of now collecting the data that we need to evaluate what are the aspects that we have to bring forward. And I echo my last slide. It's the evidence-based data that we'll be collecting, and it's the evidence-based data that will be able to provide the next steps on how to regulate a product for 500 million people in the EU. And based on the weight that the European Union carries as a party, I'm sure this is a very important aspect for global tobacco product regulation as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we have more questions, but we have more time. This is a hot topic. I'm sure that many other questions they are going to come up later. We conclude this table and we continue with the agenda. Okay, thank you to all.